I'd like to call to order the March 22nd, 2011 meeting of the City Council. May we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
All right, we will move on then to clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilmember Daigle.
None.
Councilmember Curry.
Just on item 5, the completion of our traffic signal modernization program, phases 4 and 7. Do we have a time frame for the following phases for that program?
Councilman Curry, I don't have it with me, but I can get that to you.
All right, so we'll ask that question.
We are working on that.
At 7. Thanks.
Councilmember Selich.
I have none.
And Councilmember Hill.
I have none.
Councilmember Rosansky.
None, thank you.
And Councilmember Gardner.
None.
Excuse me, Mayor Pro Tem Gardner. I did have a couple of comments. For item number 4 regarding fees and the fee schedule, I'm just curious if anyone contacted Glen Everroad for an explanation of how these prior fees were omitted.
We did not contact, I'm sorry, Tracy McCrainer, Finance Director. We did not contact Glenn. We did work with all the other departments and people in those departments at the time, and they were unaware of any reasons why they would have been left off. But police also mentioned that they weren't even aware that those new fees were recommended by the consultant. So.
All right. Well, I'm willing to consider to concede the accidental nature of this having happened, but it does raise potentially serious questions about the potential for insubordination, you know, associated with not having executed something that the council has passed.
Understood.
So,
I think with our projected process that we intend to follow, that we will ensure that that does not happen, and there will be diligent conversation about every fee and what our recommendation is, and then follow up on what the council decides.
all right. I guess I would make that comment with regard to anything that council passes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I won't belabor the point. With regard to item number 5, again, talking about the synchronization of the lights on the peninsula, if somebody could arrange for me to have a little demonstration of the light synchronization for the peninsula, you guys decide how you want to do that and what's the best way to do it, but I wouldn't mind spending an hour or so to look at that. Thank you very much. Okay. On to parking meter operations. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I have my hedgehog in front of me, and there's a reason I have a hedgehog, and that's, again, the book Good to Great. They talk about focusing on what we alone as a city might do well and or better than anybody else. And I don't consider parking meter management or enforcement to be within what we call our hedgehog. So thus, I saw this as an opportunity to contract this program out. Tracy McCrainer will take it from here and explain the process, and we certainly welcome your comments about it, because it's a small program, but it's a fairly big step for us.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have 9 short slides, which I feel are detailed, and after I go through those slides, I would be introducing all the representatives that are here tonight from Central Parking. I, myself, Mike Torres, and Evelyn Sen are here along with Central to answer any questions that aren't answered through the presentation, as well as accept any community public comment. Our current parking operations and enforcement, the city manages 2,675 metered spaces currently. Many of our meters are outdated and broken, and most, if not all, do not accept credit cards. We do have a couple multi-space meters that accept credit cards, but primarily we don't have that available for our customers. Our collection vehicles are in need of replacement, and the current staffing for all parking meters is the maintenance and collection staff are in my office in administrative services. They are 3.72 FTEs, or full-time equivalents. That's 3 full-time and 1 part-timer who works 3/4 time. They do all maintenance, collection, installation, and supervision of the program. The expired meters are enforced on a part-time basis by 3 community service officers in the police department. Those community service officers have many responsibilities, only one being parking meter enforcement. And as you will see in what's being proposed by Central, they're proposing 4 dedicated parking enforcement just for parking meters. Our net parking meter revenue as budgeted and on track for 2011 is $3 million. This is a $3.5 million revenue budget offset with an operating expense of about $500,000, and that's the total operating expense for both my department, admin services, and the police department, community service officers. Staff and I looked at other models in cities, and as Dave was talking about this hedgehog, parking became one of those ideal candidates for potential outsourcing. This is just a handful of cities that we contacted, but the range of services that they offered, and were actually doing really well, was anything from getting huge amounts of money up front and then basically transitioning all parking meter enforcement and responsibilities to a vendor for, say, a 75-year contract. That's definitely not what was of interest to Newport Beach. But a lot of these other cities have various phases of on-street parking that are outsourced, off-street. Few had both, like we're going to propose tonight. Some do lots, some just do enforcement. So as we looked at these other agencies and talked to them and looked at our own organization, we thought that our parking meters, both on-street and off-street, the enforcement as well as collections and maintenance, look like an ideal candidate. So we prepared a parking meter RFQ, and we had these 5 goals in mind. One is, as you are well aware, we don't have a lot of customer outreach for our parking issues in this city. And I think the recent, the Balboa area where we were looking at a new parking meter district and the public outcry from that really attests to that. So we really wanted to find a vendor that would be strong in customer outreach, get out in our community and work with our community for what's best for that community and get their support up front. We wanted to improve quality of service to our customers because as we were working with Lieutenant Kadalka of the police department, he said the angriest people he gets are people that get parking tickets. Not the people he arrests and throws in jail, but people who get parking tickets. So we understand that we want a vendor who's going to accept that as a quality of service and be an ambassador to our community. We definitely need modernization of our parking meter infrastructure and equipment. That alone is probably going to potentially double our revenues in the future years. And that leads to maximizing our parking meter revenue. Once we do the new technologies, credit card, pay by cell, we will go over what our estimates are, but it will significantly increase our parking meter revenue. And then finally, improving our parking meter enforcement activities. As I was saying, we don't have dedicated parking officers. That is just one role of many that our community service officers are currently doing. So the evaluation criteria we used in our RFQ was, well, first we received 7 proposals, and then we set up an evaluation committee. That committee had a representative from admin services, the city manager's office, police, and then we have an outside financial advisor that helps us on contracts of a financial nature to kind of give an independent review of what the proposals are and what they thought financial capabilities were of the consultants. So these 4 individuals set out with the following 6 evaluation criteria. These were rated on a numeric scale of 1 to 5, and then from those they went through all 7 proposals. Those criteria were customer service and outreach. As we've said, we really want to focus on our customers. Experience on similar projects with similar and comparable cities, that was important to us. The qualifications of the firm and the staff they would use would be important, as well as the proposed revenue enhancements and infrastructure replacements. Again, both critical to the city going forward. And then service deployment, while not as important as the above, because we assume that the vendors will be able to come to our city and do this, but how fast can you get it up and running? And our preference was a 30-day implementation period. We want this up and running well before Memorial Day weekend. So based on this rated numeric scale, the top 3 scores were received by Central, Duncan, and SP+, and that was a unanimous decision on all 4 raters. The top 3 were then invited back to an interview here at the city. The interview panel was myself, Evelyn Sen, my revenue manager, Michael Torres here from the City Attorney's Office, Lieutenant Kadelka from Police, and Rob Houston from the City Manager's Office. We applied that same evaluation criteria that I went over on the slide before, customer service, community outreach, revenue enhancement, but we went into more detail. The proposals, while large and time-consuming, were very high level and didn't offer the city a lot of detail about what the specific companies could bring to our city. So we used these evaluation times, scheduled at about 3 hours. Most went over. But to really ask these companies, what are you going to do for the city? What's your outreach program like? What's your training program like? Police was interested in how are you going to ensure that our community is safe? Their existing community service officers go through a thorough background check, and Lieutenant Kadelka wanted to make sure that any firm we picked would be willing to go through the same scrutiny and backgrounds. And so we were able to have a chance in these interviews to ask those detailed questions, and then to ask them, what kind of revenue share opportunities would you be willing to enter into with the city? Would you be willing to offer the city a minimum revenue guarantee? Things like that. One thing that came out from the interview process was Central was the only company who came to the city 3 weeks before the interview. They had a project team that stayed in our city. They walked every metered zone. They followed our collection personnel. They made an assessment of our collection vehicles and our collection processes. They talked to businesses. They talked to visitors. They asked people, what do you like? What do you not like about the parking meter situation here? Then they also went to other areas, for instance, Corona del Mar, and they brought to an interview a whole packet of suggested improvements. Whether we hire them or not, they're like, this is what we do best. We spent the last 3 weeks in Newport Beach evaluating your city, and here's some opportunities for improvements. And that really set them above and beyond for us. We were very impressed with that, and they knew the city routes better than I did. We then performed reference checks for all 3 companies. We picked at least 3 references per company. They were asked to provide 5. And again, with Central's references, all of their references got back to us immediately. Some of the other companies' references took 4, 5, 6 attempts before they would call us back. And they would call us back. They didn't have bad things to say, but you could just tell there wasn't an urgency. There wasn't a real strong desire for a lot of those companies. But all of Central's references called us back immediately if they didn't pick up the phone. They ranked them outstanding in all respects, but they really gave them high marks in the area of customer service and community outreach, again, an area that we really want to focus on, and revenue enhancements. And Central was able to provide just today some very specific revenue enhancement opportunities just in local California cities in the first year that we can share with you later. But again, their references were so enthusiastic and so positive that, again, they kind of set out from the pack. So our final selection criteria is we sent an addendum to the top 3, and we said, okay, now that we've met with you and you've told us what you're willing to do, what are you willing to agree to in writing? We asked them, we definitely wanted a minimum revenue guarantee. The city currently nets $3 million in revenue with outdated equipment, without proper resources for enforcement. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we got, it was going to be better than that. A lot of other cities don't do that, and I think Central will attest to that. This is the first contract where they've approved to a revenue guarantee. Second thing we wanted to know from the consultants is, what are your proposed operating costs and profit? What are you going to be looking forward after the city's minimum is reached? What do you want for reimbursement for your operating profit? And again, this is only once the city's minimum $3 million is paid. Second item from the consultant is, you're going to be replacing all of our infrastructure and equipment. What are your amortization costs? What kind of infrastructure do you expect to replace? How much do you think that's going to cost? That is all going to belong to the city, and the city's going to be responsible for paying that, but we wanted details on what they were willing to commit to. And finally, once the $3 million city guarantee is paid, and then the consultant receives their operating costs and amortization reimbursements, we're expecting excess revenues. It's one of the main reasons we're entering into this contract. What kind of revenue share are you going to split with the city? You know, is it 80-20, 70-30? What are you willing to give of all that excess revenue? We got all of the recommendations back, or the responses back, And overwhelmingly, Central Parking Systems is the firm that we want to recommend to this council tonight for approval for outsourcing our meter parking enforcement and operations. They received the highest marks from their reference checks for customer service, community outreach, and revenue enhancements. They spent 3 weeks assessing our city's current operations and enforcement activities, and they brought to us a booklet of information on how we can improve that and what they would do, boots on the ground, first day. They proposed the lowest operating cost and profit of the final selection criteria. They offered a more detailed and thorough plan for our infrastructure replacement. They came back and said they're going to replace at least 1,600 meters. They're going to put all credit cards. They're going to offer pay-by-cell on most. They're going to make it easier for our customers. There's a plan for that. We have to re-meet and approve upon the amortization schedule, but their plan was more detailed and gave estimates, where the other companies were willing to set a certain dollar amount. We'll give you $1 million of new infrastructure, or we'll give you $1.5 million. They didn't really have enough detail to outline out how many new meters was that, how many multi-space versus single space. And even though that's subject to change, because we still have to meet once they get here again, boots on the ground, it was just a much more thoughtful and deliberate plan. They also worked with the city and agreed to the most advantageous revenue share out there, and that's all the excess revenues over the minimum city $3 million, and the $1.1 million as proposed by Central will be split 88.5% going to the city, 11.5% to Central. So it's because of these criteria that we are recommending to council to select Central Parking for our parking meters. The revenue terms of the agreement as proposed to you tonight, and I'd like to spend some time on this because I did get quite a few questions. The first $3,010,351 of revenue earned from parking meters will be given to the city. This is a guarantee, meaning if in our first year we receive $2.8 million, Central will make up the difference, and the city will receive that minimum guarantee of $3 million. We will be giving examples later, too. If we get $3.5 million in revenue, the city is guaranteed the first $3 million. Central will get the next $500,000.
Tracy,
Yes.
a quick question.
Yes.
My understanding is that our actual experience is that in the most recent time period you have numbers, we've actually received $3.5 million.
We are budgeting to receive $3.5 million this year, and we are on track to meet that. Hopefully, with the summer months being nice and sunny, and that we have a couple big months coming up, but we are on track to meet that.
So there's a clear cushion here, at least based upon our current expectations.
We did reduce it by operating costs to get our net revenue bond, but then wanted Central to have an opportunity for earnings.
Now, when we get into these cell phone transactions and credit card, there's percentage fees involved with those. We don't get the full quarter of the full dollar. So what are those fees and who's paying?
So we were working with the fees. I believe I got an estimate from Central that on, say if you had $4 million of credit card revenues, the fees associated with that would be approximately $150,000. That would be net of the parking meter revenue. It's not passed to the credit card user, but the city would still be guaranteed the $3 million, and so it would basically come out of the excess revenues that are expected from the duration of the contract. If we didn't hit the excess revenues, then it would be against the Central portion.
Okay, are there back-end fees on our part after the money is collected?
We are going to have a bank of our choosing. There will be typical banking fees. I don't expect them to be any different than our current banking fees now. We haven't set up those accounts or those terms yet, but they should be minimal.
Okay, because I asked Beverly Hills today what their experience was, and they indicated to me that those kinds of fees are in the range of 15 to 25%, that they're really substantial once you get into this sort of credit card, cell phone types of transactions.
So that was the best estimate that I had up front. But
Where is that provided for in the contract, about those fees coming out of the excess?
They're not specifically addressed in the contract, but as far as the minimum guarantee for the city, that is specifically called out in the contract terms, Exhibit B, and that's what Central referred to.
No, I understand about the minimum. You're telling me there's a significant $150,000 contract term here potentially, so why won't we have it?
Well, wait, aren't we talking about a fee that the user pays, so that if you pay the credit card, I don't know, Councilmember Daigle, what kind of fee are you talking about?
So,
This
for
is a merchant
example, today I bought lunch at a Chinese restaurant. I asked them, I used a credit card. They said, this cost us 3.25%. So the merchant has to pay it.
Right, like in my restaurant, I have about $30,000 a month in credit card bills, and I pay about $950, or $950 deducted from my credit card
As a
receipts.
merchant.
As a
Yeah.
merchant, yeah.
Okay.
We currently don't have the merchant fees as a line item in the contract.
Okay. And again, with Beverly Hills, they inform me that there's 4 or 5 different scenarios. You can pay sort of a fee up front and then 7 cents per transaction. It seems as if we would want to think this out a little bit more as to how we're going to do this as we sort of evolve into these credit cards and cell phones.
Let me invite Jerry Skillett from Central Parking up and maybe kind of talk about his experiences with other cities. Jerry?
Mayor and Council, thank you. Just to clear that
Could you state your name again,
Yeah,
please?
sure. Jerry Skillett, Vice President of the Central Parking System here in Southern California. And we'll introduce our team whenever you want us to. So let's address I think the first question was pay by cell. Is that correct? And so on the pay by cell, the way the contracts work is that actually the cell phone user does pay that charge. Okay, so there is a transaction charge, including a credit card fee. The city does not pay that. So on pay by cell, that's not a deduction from revenue from the city or Central Parking. It's actually by the carrier.
So how much is that typically on a percentage basis total?
On pay by cell is how much? It's 35 cents. And so that's to the end user. Now, on the credit card,
Flat fee?
pardon me,
It's a flat fee no matter how much you're putting on the cell charge?
Bob,
Yeah, but we don't pay it, Ed. The cell phone user pays it.
Right, the cell.
the cell phone user
Concerned
pays
about
it.
what the consumer pays.
Oh.
Sure.
But how does the cell phone company get the money to us, and is there any fees with that?
So those are transferred just like a credit card transaction to us. And so just like a merchant ID, that's the way that's set up. They collect their fees. Now understand
There's a merchant fee to process that as well. There's the cell phone, and then there's the merchant fee.
Right.
So there's kinds of different fees. I mean, what would help is if there was some type of a flow chart that
Sure.
we could see where all these fees were going and who's collecting fees along the way.
Okay. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. Now, one thing that we should also bring up is on the pay by cell, the adoption of pay by cell is a very, very low number. And so the idea of offering that for the public is a convenience, but we're not thinking that there's a high percentage of transactions that are pay by cell. Most of the transactions that we see changing in your system, we're replacing 1,600 single meter heads with the ability to take credit cards. And so there will be a percentage of credit card transactions that are cash today, so that changes, but those are not pay by cell.
So basically, the pay-by-cell issue is inconsequential.
It's very
By
small.
virtue of the fact that the load factor is paid by the consumer, and that'll be very low transaction volume for quite some time.
Correct.
But so there's still this issue of the merchant fee, though, which is applicable to all credit card transactions.
Yes.
And so can you describe for us how you contract for the merchant fee and generally what that turns out to be in terms of basis points or percentage points of revenue?
It's usually less than 2%, and so it's
Even on small dollar transactions like
Yes.
this?
Yes, and so what happens is because we, today, our firm collects over $1.3 billion of credit card transactions, we're at the very lowest tier of transaction fees and percentages, and so we do not mark those up. Those are passed right back to this contract.
Okay, and this is your merchant fee contract, not the city's merchant fee?
It is. It's our merchant fee contract.
But are you saying that the fee is passed back through to the city or deducted from the?
It's just deducted from gross revenues. It's reported and deducted from gross revenues.
So in our example here, let's say the first $3 million, we're going to get $3 million no matter what happens.
Yes.
Okay. And so let's say the revenues are 6 million. Say $4
Well,
million.
let's say $4
Okay,
million.
$4 million.
Let's
Great.
say 4.9, really, because let's understand why this is important. And again, I'm really not trying to sell you on anything. I think that the time that we spent here, what we really, I think our heart was, what can we, from our experiences, what can we provide the city of Newport Beach that might be helpful in really changing the way this is done? And so one of the things that is happening today is the fact that people do like to use their credit cards and debit cards. They just really do. They don't like to go feed the meter. They don't carry change all the time. That's a convenience factor and a usability factor. And actually, we found in our own studies and in what we've done is that the amount of money collected from the meters goes up fairly significantly when you offer this option. So we've modeled that out for the city of Newport Beach based upon, again, the time that we spent here. And so, yes, there are merchant fees that are deducted from that in the calculation of gross revenues. But the way our contract works is that we're counting on significantly increased revenues from your system, or we would not be able to guarantee your current net income as well as invest the infrastructure dollars to it. So it's at risk. It's at our risk, frankly, as far as that goes, as far as the contract goes.
But again, not that I want to belabor the issue,
Sure.
I just want to make sure that we all understand what our deal is, because we were given an exhibit here that showed a scenario, the $4.9 million scenario,
Right.
but there's no mention of the $100 and whatever $1,000 we might, 2%, right? So $4.9 million is about $100,000 in fees. Let's say they were all credit card fees, for the
Okay.
sake of this. So that $100,000 is not reflected in here. So really, if the revenues are $4.9 million, that we're going to net out $100,000 and then start calculating the 88.
88.
It seems to
That's
me
correct.
that the simple solution here is to define revenue.
Right.
What is revenue? And you'll define it as net revenue, net of
Merchant fees.
Yes.
credit card merchant fees,
Yes.
and I don't know if there's anything else, but,
Yeah.
so the deal is based upon
Yeah.
net revenue, it just needs to be made clear in the contract.
Well, I don't, right, it's not reflected at all in the contract, right?
And I think we can make that amendment,
Well,
right, Michael?
Councilmember Rosansky, I think actually recital C references that within the first parenthetical. Parking meter revenues nets out the credit card transaction fees. And then also the revised Exhibit B that the city clerk distributed tonight also shows an example of the cost breakdown and includes, I think, an approximation of $225,000 for credit card transaction fees.
Wait,
It's in the contract.
It's in
the
the contract,
contract.
recital C on the first page, Councilmember Hill, and then the revised Exhibit B that you received tonight.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry, revised exhibit, so we have a new exhibit?
You do.
Great.
Yeah, so Councilmember Curry?
Yeah, I would just note, I was in both Sacramento and last week in Berkeley yesterday, where they have credit cards for meters, and it's much easier to use. I wouldn't have stopped, wouldn't have walked around, wouldn't have shopped if it weren't for the fact that they had that. And you round up. You put a buck in, or in this case, $1.50, as opposed to trying to find 3/4 that you really don't have to begin with in the meter. So I found it to be immensely more user-friendly in both places, and I think our visitors and our residents who use the meters are going to find it to be that as well. I'd like to ask a question about the impact on city staffing. The staff report suggests that we have 3 part-time positions, or 3 positions in police that are currently unfilled, community services people who are meter
Vacant.
who are enforcement officers, ticket writers.
Yes.
And that's good, we're going to eliminate those positions?
Yes, we are going to eliminate all 6.72 positions that
Okay.
are currently responsible. Those 3 are currently vacant in PD. So
Right.
bodies, people won't be impacted, but they will be removed from the budget. The 3.72 positions I have in admin services, 1 person is retiring next month, so it will impact 2.72 positions. Those
Yeah.
people will be laid off. But another term of the agreement and a priority to the city is Central will be treating the first priority to all existing city staff for the hiring of the Newport Beach contract.
And so would you just go over again what our estimated savings are in terms of administrative costs by virtue of implementing this
Absolutely.
contract?
It's about $500,000. It's actually a little over $500,000. $300,000 for admin services for the 3.72 positions, and we had about a little bit of M&O, about $30,000, and then a couple $100,000 for the police officer savings, for a total of over $500,000 for operating expenses avoided.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oops, sorry. Just again on the final revenue terms, so the first $3,010,000 is a city guarantee, no matter what. That keeps us even with what we're expected to make this year without any changes. The next available is 1.186 going to Central. That's for operating costs as well as their amortization of the new infrastructure that will be owned by the city. And then anything above that 4.2 million will be a revenue split between the city and Central, starting at 88.5% for the city and 11.5% for Central.
That 1.1 million is fixed for the life of the contract?
It does not change by CPI, so that was another thing. We gave the incentive for years 3 and 5 to increase their revenue share to ensure continued performance, but their operating costs will obviously go up every year. We did not put an inflator to their operating costs in the contract.
Okay.
And then just my final slide with some of the other key terms. It is a 7-year contract. That was the best timing to do a proper amortization of all the infrastructure. There is a 2-day termination clause with cause, a 7-day termination without cause, and there is no penalty to the city for imposing that. Ownership of all parking meter infrastructure will remain with the city. Everything they buy, the infrastructure, the meters, the handhelds, everything. The vehicles are their own. That stays with them. There will be no rate or hourly increases proposed with this contract. We just had the new parking meter rates approved last summer, and so all of these estimations are based on those parking meter rates with the existing metered spaces. We will improve infrastructure, but we won't change metered spaces. The city has the sole authority to change rates, hours of operations, or add meters. Of course, that would cause for a contract amendment with Central if we did that. City employees have the first priority for Central's hiring process for Newport Beach. They're going to Newport Beach residents as a second priority, and then they already have many staff in Orange County that could start tomorrow if needed. And they've ensured a 24-hour response time. That's for complaints, for broken equipment or meters. And I am here to answer any questions, or if you would prefer, I introduce the Central staff at this time.
Well,
Councilmember Curry.
Well, just a couple of things. First of all, I want to say that while we're focused on the opportunity here to increase revenues and to reduce city costs, I think the real big benefit here is that we're replacing some very old and antiquated infrastructure in the city with our private partnership here in a way that's going to be much more user-friendly for the residents and the visitors who come and park in our city. So I think while the cost is an important aspect of this, it's the new infrastructure that I think we ought to emphasize, because that's a true benefit that will be here for many, many years.
Councilmember Daigle.
Okay. In terms of that new infrastructure, are we going with single space or double or multi-space meters?
Both, as recommended. But in the 3 weeks that Central was here, they're recommending approximately 8 more multi-space meters, so the removal of single space. But as they've realized and they're willing to discuss tonight, there's a lot of areas in the city that are only available for single space, a lot of street ends that only serve 2 or a few spaces. So they would be replacing the heads of those for credit card accepting machines, but can't go to many more than multi-space meters than as they had proposed. So it'll be a mixture of both.
Okay. And what does the staff believe to be the pros and cons of multi-space versus single-space meters?
Well, I think appearance is one. I think getting rid of the single-space meters is just more, nicer to look at from the eye, and it's a little less convenient depending on where it's placed. People might have to walk a little farther. The signage might have to be improved, but I think just overall appearance is the benefit of the multi-space. And then single space is really just more convenience for the customer.
Okay. And then the city owns these meters?
Yes,
and
all of them.
Who maintains them?
Central will, as part of this contract, do all maintenance, collections, and operations.
Okay. And I don't know if you talked to Beverly Hills or any other cities about these programs?
Oh yeah, we actually talked to about a dozen cities. I did not talk to Beverly Hills, but these were just a list. We talked to Charlotte, North Carolina, Chicago, Atlanta, Anaheim, Santa Monica, and Long Beach. I'll just say 4 of those 6 are work with Central, and we're extremely positive and confident in Central's abilities. We did much more than that. There's toll roads and universities and convention centers that also use
Okay,
them.
my question was along the lines of how it impacts our city, and one of the things that Beverly Hill mentioned when they enrolled this program, that they were overwhelmed. Now, maybe Central's going to take all these calls, but when you put out 2,675 meters that are basically a communications device, then you can get 2,675 text messages. And they came in on a Monday morning to be 100 text messages, individual meters, that the meter was jammed. So how is all that going to be taken care of?
I'll have Central address that, and I'm glad you asked that. That was one of their highest ranking marks, was their customer service and community outreach. So why don't I go ahead and introduce Central now. And Jerry Scalette is the Vice President of Operations here in California, and I'll have him introduce his staff.
Thank you again. Bob Camper is head of all of our on-street parking programs. Bob and his staff spent the 3 weeks here, and longer at this point, really studying this. Mohammed Mansour, Mohammed is in charge of Orange County for us. We've been here, this is our 24th year here in Orange County. Those of you who don't know our firm, we have over 2,000 contracts in the United States. We're in 60 major cities in the country. And then I also brought Chris Com along with us, who is our community relations firm. We use those in all of the cities that were contracted that you saw on the screen. It's part of our contract. It's a very important part of our contract to really have community relations with all the stakeholders in every city. It just makes a big, big difference for us. It's part of this contract for 7 years, and it's an important aspect. And so the question was, I'm going to have Bob come up and answer the question about what happens when you change out 1,600 meters. Okay?
Actually, can expand on it. Why are we only doing 1,600 and not all the meters?
Okay. Bob, you want to?
If you would.
When we're done with those questions, we'll let Councilmember Hill ask a question. All right, go ahead.
Good.
Good evening, Bob Camper with Central Parking. Let's see, so where to start? So a rollout of a program, the first thing you need is a good community outreach. So you have to make sure that as much as possible the public is aware of the change that's taking place. Part of the beauty when you talk about single and multi-space meters and the difference is, by and large, most people have used a single-space meter. So if you took your single-space meter you have now and you pop the top off of it, the little dome, and you put in a new, what we call a mech or a mechanism, what it's doing is you still have your coin option, but it's adding the credit card option. So it's well defined as to how to use it on the meter, and you're putting a little solar panel on top of it. So to the end user, it's pretty much what they're used to, except there's a new option. So you have to have the out-front outreach. You have to make sure the community understands what's happening, get as much in front as you can. I worked for the city of Sarasota for a while, so when we were going to look at paid parking, we did video, we did a bunch of different things to make sure people understood it. But there's a very low learning curve with the single space upgrade. Now, when you go to a pay station, granted, there is a little more of a learning curve. People may never have engaged a multi-space meter, and there's a little more challenge there. But that's one of the reasons that the single space is a nice option for here. The other one was kind of touched on by, Tracy, that you have a lot of streets where, maybe around 34th or so, you start with these 3 off meters, 2 off meters as you keep going down. You can put a multi-space meter there. I won't say you can't do anything, but the cost of that multi-space meter to control 3 spaces is not very cost effective. In fact, it would be very expensive. You're probably somewhere around, you want to be 7 to 8 spaces on an average for a multi-space meter. So now you start getting into 2 different kinds of technology, 2 different kinds of systems you're operating. The other thing that we took into consideration for more single-space meters is you have a permit program in the city. And you want to continue that permit program, and we know you have the blue poles, you have regular silver poles. There's all different kinds of options for the residents here. So if you put in a multi-space meter, the kind of the crux is, do you leave the pole so you can still have the blue space, the blue pole, so the person knows they can park there? At that point, it becomes another sign. So now you're going to use it as signage to try to direct a parker to the space so they can go pay the machine. Because either way, you're going to have to somehow delineate all the spaces so people can do a pay-by-space scenario. The next thing is, if you removed them, we still somehow have to figure out how to say this is a blue space. So it's not as easy as just let's cut down all the poles and still allow everybody to have their permits and enjoy the freedom they have now to park at those spaces. So that was another consideration as far as single space meter goes.
What about, the question was 1,600, what was magical about that?
I don't know if it was magical, but when you look at the parking system and you look at the value of the spaces and the occupancy, that's about the number of spaces that have a good enough occupancy where you'd want to start off and put in the option. That's really the short and long of it. There's also some spaces that are only a quarter. You can't, just $1 is the breaking point for an upgrade. If you're not at $1, you don't want to put in a credit card solution.
$1 per hour.
Yes, because of the associated fees that were brought up. Obviously, it starts to erode the
So
revenue.
how are you going to handle the heads that are not going to be replaced? I mean, I guess what the staff is telling us is a lot of our equipment is deteriorated and not working. So how are those going to be handled?
Okay, so we're obviously going to be taking out 1,600 mechanisms from the meters. So right there, you're going to start an inventory of 1,600 mechanisms for the remaining ones. Granted, I'm not saying that every one is in perfect working order, but by and large, you're going to have an inventory right there to replace and make sure you're using the best of the best for those remaining spaces. To the pay-by-cell solution, you will offer then the pay-by-cell solution, so you are offering a credit card option for folks who want to sign up for the pay-by-cell. And just kind of briefly how that works. Someone signs up for pay-by-cell with their credit card. After that, they're really literally just make a call, where they're at, the meter they're at, and they pay. The 35 cents does cover everything. I just want to make sure, too, because we kind of got into this whole fees. And the 35-cent charge to the customer covers all of the credit card fees. So there's not an additional...
What if they only put 50 cents in? It's a 35-cent charge?
It's a flat fee, and normally, once again, $1 is the minimum amount.
Okay, so Beverly Hills, 15 to 25% take is probably a pretty good projection then.
On a pay-by-cell scenario, it would be, if someone paid $1. Another great point was...
But we're not paying it.
Oh, no, you're not paying that fee. Okay, so
Right.
pay-by-cell, the end user...
There's
pays
no
the fee.
take on pay-by-sell from our end of the
No.
revenue.
So $2 is $2 is $2. There is no credit card transaction fee.
On the pay-by-cell, are they billed by their cell phone company or by their credit card company?
They are billed by the pay-by-cell company.
So
So in other words...
AT&T sends them a bill.
No,
for-
Park Mobile, for instance,
Or
is a
Park Mobile.
pay-by-cell company. So that's the company that is charging them.
So AT&T sends the money to the city or to you?
Well, Park Mobile
Park
does.
Mobile sends the money to the city. In other words, it gets deposited like anything else into the bank account.
They give us the full $1, and they bill the consumer the 35 cents.
Correct.
And are there any fees on your end to process that $1? Or no?
It's going to be a deposit into that account.
Yeah, he said that the 35 cents covers the merchant association fee.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I just get my question answered, the earlier one, which was who at your firm handles, when you get 100 text messages a day, and what's your response time to that to go unclog meters and so on?
Okay. The manager of the program would have to handle that. So on the onset, actually, I will be handling that because I'm our on-street municipal director. So I'll take care of any issues there may be. I don't anticipate...
Explain what staff that we will have.
Oh, sure. Aside from a manager, we're going to have just what you currently have now. I mean, we'll have collections people, we'll have people who maintain the meters, enforcement. So we're going to have a full staff. But as far as responding to an actual customer issue, it would always be a manager.
How many people
when
do
you-
you, how many people do you anticipate employing for our city? How many workers do you plan on having here in our city to handle the contract?
Okay, so you'll have 2 collections people, you're going to have a maintenance person, you're going to have a total of 8 enforcement people, because you're going to have 4 at any given time. You're going to have a manager, a lead, what we call a lead ambassador. And that's, we don't, I didn't want to use the word because it might confuse people. We don't really call our enforcement people enforcement. We termed the program an ambassador program in Charlotte when we started in 1997 there, and it's kind of become an industry standard that we had set there. So we call our folks ambassadors.
And these folks are all full-time employees dedicated to the city, or they're?
There's full and part-time. I mean, for FTEs, some are full-time, and we do have some part-time people to make, that's the only way to get the enforcement to 4 people.
So full-time equivalents, you have an idea of how many people would be employing?
That's what he gave.
Hey.
So, yeah.
Oh, this is-
He gave me
oh,
full-time equivalents, but
okay.
the actual staff.
So there may even be more people. I got you.
Right.
Great.
I'm sorry, you really haven't answered my question. Maybe I can express it a little more clearly. These meters, I understand, send an electronic signal when there's a problem, and you get, which is different than a customer, a resident calling you up with a complaint. When you get 100 or so text messages, who handles those?
Our management staff and the maintenance staff. I'm sorry, I thought you meant that the customers were were texting us. I'm sorry, it's my misunderstanding.
But I don't think they anticipate that severity of meter problems. So, but that hasn't been their experience with other cities that they've had. But it might be helpful, too, to talk about the community outreach you're going to do before the 30-day transition, just so council will know what you're going to be doing out there with the homeowners associations, the businesses.
I want to be respectful of Councilmember Hill's question, too. I think he was teed up next, if you know.
Well, are we done with that line of questioning? Okay.
For
Councilmember
now.
Hill, do you have a question?
I have several.
Good.
In going through the documentation, one of the things I noticed in the evaluation criteria was, and you did not mention it, and nor did you include it in your slides today, was the willingness to hire current city personnel. And my understanding in going through the staff reports is that in reality, many of the positions are not filled now, and so it's not that we're turning 7 people out on the street. In fact, everyone may well be employed either by the consultant that's come on board or the position is vacant now. And I think that's important to recognize. While we are guaranteed the $3 million, Central is guaranteed the $381,000 for the equipment. My understanding of the documentation.
We're not guaranteed.
And so therefore, that means that if the system only generated $3 million, we would get the $3 million, but then we would also have to fund the payment on the 381. The documentation says Central is guaranteed an annual payment of 381.
But the contract is different than that, so would you clarify that, please?
Right. The equipment, it does belong to the city. If Central does make the replacements as requested, we will owe them that 381, if that's what the amount ends up being. But it could be paid over the life of the 7-year contract. So we do owe them the cost for the infrastructure replacement. That will belong to the city.
Well,
That's not how I understand
I
it.
guess I am still
Yeah.
confused then, because the contract says there's a total of $1.1 million of payments to be due, and it says in there fairly clearly to me that that depends on the availability of revenue above $3 million. So if the revenue is $3 million, you get paid nothing as long as the contract is in force.
Right.
Right.
Now, if the contract is terminated, then there is a termination payment that pays off
Yes.
the
Correct.
remainder of the equipment
Yes.
cost.
That's correct.
But so long as the contract is in force, you are at risk for the full $1.1 million
Right.
above $3 million.
That's
Right.
correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't see anything in the contract about the city's ability to retain the blue meter system and our other mass master parking system, and that it would be the sole discretion of the city for the location and the number of the meters.
Right, the parking permit program is currently not covered with this. It's going to stay with the city. That could be a future amendment to the contract. That is an area that I think the city really needs to look at overall. We have the blue poles, we have the masters, and the city manager has asked us to look at that program overall to see if we can't streamline it, make it easier. But it is not part of this contract, and Central will not be enforcing the permit program or giving out the permits. They could do that if we so desired, but that's not currently part of this agreement.
My point was more on the basis that the city will continue to collect that revenue, and that revenue will not be pooled with this revenue.
Absolutely, it's completely separate.
Just as the citation revenue will not be pooled with this revenue.
Exactly.
And importantly, our residents will still have the convenience of that program.
Yes.
Right. And then in the contract under Section 261, it defines what Central is responsible for and what the city is responsible for with respect to installation and maintenance. And it acknowledges that we own the meters, but I interpret it as that we don't own the meters and we don't receive title to them until we've paid for them in full. I'm wondering if there shouldn't be a provision that we take title the minute they're installed, because what happens if Central goes BK or something of that sort? You know, what happens to the ownership of those meters at that point in time?
Well, if they went BK and the contract would be canceled, then we would owe them for the money on the meters, and they would become the city's.
But are we not necessarily?
No.
Yeah, they could become the property of somebody else. And,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so I think I don't expect a solution, but I think that's something that needs to be dealt with. And then the contract also says, of course, that they maintain the parking meters during the course of the contract. What happens after the contract's over? Then does the maintenance become our responsibility? And if so, do they have any contracts with anybody right now where the client has to pay for the maintenance, and what kind of fee would we expect on that?
Fantastic question. I don't know. Do we have an instance where a contract has ended and the city has taken possession of the equipment, and what would a maintenance contract be at that point? Yeah.
I think what would happen is, as we currently do, we would take over the maintenance of those, and we would have to prepare for that and either enter into a contract with another provider or be willing to take that responsibility on ourselves. But obviously, come year 5, we're going to be in active renegotiations with Central or making plans to do something else. So I can't imagine a situation where we would get to the end of the contract and not have that opportunity to either renew or renegotiate with someone else.
What's the life of one of those meters?
10 years plus. I guess, one of the things that we tried to build into our own formula at working here is being able to maintain the meters, being able to, if there are any other kind of technology upgrades that happen during this period of time, of being able to do that. So they haven't reached their full life at 7 years.
But
Is it your expectation, though, that at the end of 7 years, if everything goes right, that your contract would be renewed and would continue working?
We would love that, but you never know that. You just don't. What we tried to do when the magic behind the 7 years was really much more about what period of time is a reasonable amortization for that equipment and work within a good formula for the city of Newport Beach. It's not driven so much by central parking as much as what that balance is. And so, of course, we would love to, in year 5, 6, or 7, be negotiating for, future terms, but they're not specified in the contract, and that's normal for us. There's usually not provisions for extensions past that period of time.
I guess my point is that, what I would expect if that 380,000, something like that, is an amortization of the equipment, that once that equipment was paid for and was amortized with the term of the contract, that expense would go away. So if the contract was extended,
Yes.
and if the formulas remain the same, then the contract would be 381,000 or whatever the number is less in that next period of time.
That's correct.
Okay, but with regard to the equipment, the key issue really is there anything proprietary about that equipment or the software that operates it such that if you drop out of the picture, nobody else can maintain it or operate it?
No, it's not central parking equipment. So there's nothing that we're adding on top of that that's proprietary or a system or software or anything else. It's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Good question.
And just so I'm clear about the amortization, let's say in years 1 and 2, we don't hit the magic number and you don't make that initial $1.2 million. So there's no later years we adjusting the numbers so that ultimately you're paid. You're just going to eat that, is my understanding.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Councilmember Selich, you've been patient here.
I'm still confused over the 2,600 versus the 1,600 meters. So there's 1,000 meters that are, lack of a better term, underperforming meters that generate only a quarter an hour? Is that
Well,
we're talking
what
about?
happens is that when you convert to a credit card type of meter, as Bob said, if you have a meter that you're only collecting 25 cents an hour,
We're only charging 25 cents an hour.
yeah, we're only charging 25 cents an hour. There's no return on investment to replace them with the new technology. It's not necessary. And so that, when we took a look at the number of meters, what the rates were being charged, and that's really how we came up with that number. That was the one that looked like it worked best for the city of Newport Beach. Now, if we were an equipment manufacturer, we would probably be sitting here going like, replace them all, and that'd be part of the formula. But we felt that wasn't necessary, that wasn't the best use of capital for all of those meters.
So is there other criteria other than a quarter an hour? Sounds like it was more than that. I'm trying to understand how you came up with that number.
Bob? Yeah.
Some of it also, sorry, you could still be at $1 an hour. I mean, you can be at $5 an hour, but if the occupancy isn't there, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to upgrade the technology. To
And
spend the
we
money.
we have records of every meter, what we collect on the meters? Is that how we do it?
We currently do collect by zone, so we have the information on zone. Once we get on a contract with a potential provider who has that ability, we would be able to see how the meters are performing on a daily basis. We currently don't have that ability with our current infrastructure.
No, I understand, but I think he just said that they're making a determination as to what meters to change out
I
by
think that was
what
in
the
your
rate per
assessment.
hour and the amount the meters collects in a given day, I imagine, or month, or whatever the period is. But we don't have data for each meter.
No, you don't.
You didn't look at each meter and say, oh, yeah, this is a good meter to change out, and this is a bad one.
So
I'm sorry.
there are two other issues, though, associated with this, convenience and confusion. And so, for me, I would err on the side of replacing a meter head if it's even close to the line, because that way people have a greater universal understanding that they're going to be able to use their credit card if they park there, and there won't be confusion about how come I can't use my credit card and that sort of thing. So I guess just my personal view is I'd err on the side of more installations rather than less for that reason, even though it may not be strictly financially payback. Councilmember Davis?
I want to let him finish.
Questions. Guys, you keep cutting me off.
Well,
But if I can tag on, can I tag
Well,
on to make
is-
one add-on to your
go
convenience
ahead.
point that Councilman
This is
Curry?
on the same point.
Right, Councilman Curry made it as well, and this convenience can really help drive the revenue. And if you have to swipe your credit card for $2, it's a lot easier to do than to find 8 quarters in your car and put them in. And also in terms of any increases in revenue, so for example, in Sausalito, they went from, let's say, $2 to $3, and there was just a lot of blowback from the community. They had to rescind it. Beverly Hills went from, let's say, $2 to $3. No one complained. You know, again, the credit card is kind of a no-brainer for people.
Okay, back to you, Ed.
Okay, are we going to see a schedule or a map of the meters that are going to be replaced so we can see what you're doing here?
Yeah, we have in the agreement that we will work with Central on that, and we will bring that back to council.
Okay, so we'll get to see that. What about the equipment? Are we going to get to see the equipment?
Well, I'll just-
Examples of the single-head meters and the multi-station meters, seeing what we're buying?
I'm sorry? I
Are
didn't-
we going to get to see examples of what
If
we're
you'd like
buying?
to see it,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah,
And when
we'll,
will
we'll
we see
bring those
those?
back fairly early in the contract because again, their goal is to put all this in by Memorial Day.
Well, we'll want to see them before the internet. I mean, do you have a picture
No,
you
I-
can show us
yeah.
tonight or something?
We have a picture.
Well, can you have it tonight or at least for the regular
Well,
meeting?
But I prefer to see more than a picture because we have experience, again, on this point. We have experience in Balboa Village right now with another vendor where people were not able to successfully use the equipment. And I'd like to have an understanding that the pay station equipment that you're using is different than that and much more intuitive in terms of the use, ease of operation.
How many cities do you use this equipment in currently?
Okay, so digital, for example, a digital pay station, which is digital payment technologies, we use it across the country for off-street as well as on-street. So I believe we have
60 cities, so hundreds.
I think we have 384 and plus or minus machines in service across the country for our off-street operations. In Charlotte, we have about 45 machines. As far as single-space meters, the leader in single-space meter technology is IPS. The best I could tell you is Laguna just installed them, so if you've seen their single-space credit card solution, Los Angeles, San Francisco, we did use them as a pilot program in Newport, Rhode Island, another Newport, but which went excellent.
So they're in widespread use at this point.
Oh, yes, and they have excellent reliability and.
I'd still like to see a picture tonight if we can arrange
Oh,
that.
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
both the single station and the multi-station, both
Okay.
types. One of you said that a multi-station takes the place of 7 single parking meters. How does that cost equate? Does 7 single units equal the cost of 1 multi-station meter? Is that how that works?
Yes. Pretty close. It's pretty close to a draw even.
Well, no, I'm just trying to figure out where
But-
the break even is
Okay,
there.
so but you're also not removing a pole, you're not adding signage, you're not doing some other things that you'll have to do. Also, one thing people don't consider is if, and I'm not saying that the machines are going to be up and running all the time, right? So a machine can go down. So if my single space meter goes down, I have to come and fix it, but I've got a space out of commission. If my multi-space meter goes down, I have 7 or 8 spaces that someone can't pay. So there is also a scale there as far as if something does go awry. And there's more, it's like a vending machine if you look at a multi-space meter. Okay, so there are more moving parts. There are more things that can inherently go wrong over time. While they're both solar-driven, one of them has a small green battery in it that has a great life cycle. The other one is using, the best I could tell you is it's the same battery that's in an electronic wheelchair. So you have some trickle cell issues sometimes with pay stations. So from a durability, you guys have a lot of great sunlight here, so it's a little more efficient as far as operations. Plus, as we kind of talked about, to this whole 2675, 1,600 spaces, it's very easy to take, if an area was underperforming, and we wanted to take 100 and say, hey, what if we put it over in this area, or this is what people want, let's see what happens, and we just no one was using, for some reason we miscalculated where those should have been. I can do that in less than a day with the single head. And in fact, you can watch a video online of it. It takes literally 30 seconds to install a single space meter upgrade. So from an ease of use and uptime, it just has a little more durable and a little better. Because you're not hardwiring it. If everything was electric, like on a parking lot we have a lot of parking lots where they're actually hardwired into electricity. You don't have that battery issue. You're in a little better shape with a multi-space unit.
Okay. Are these going to be Are these meters going to have the ability to be adjusted on the fly if the city ever gets to a demand
Great
parking
question.
system where you can just
Yes, and in
load
fact,
some software and it goes wirelessly and changes the rates?
it's kind of cool. It's kind of a cool thing, okay? So the IPS meters are online, and the city as well as Central Parking at any time can pull up the meters. You have a secure gateway, and you can look at the meters anywhere. It almost looks like Google Map, and you can see that, A, they're working. You can see the revenue that's in the meter. You can push rates to it. You can push a message to it. So let's say there's an event in the city and we want to take out these 2 blocks because we know we don't want people to park there starting at 9 a.m. the next day. We don't have to go bag it. We can actually have the message on those spaces say that there's no parking and the reason. It can scroll. So yeah, the answer is yes. And you can congestion. Actually, IPS was the leader in that. Looking, I think it was in L.A. It was either L.A. or San Francisco. I can't remember which, but they were looking at congestion pricing, and that is exactly what they're going to do. And how it works is it's usually tied to occupancy. So the streets hit 70. I'm just using arbitrary numbers here, but 75% occupancy, the meter rate goes up $1. It hits, or 50 cents, let's say. It hits 85 or 90%, it goes up $1. So you're just incrementally going up by what the occupancy is. Now, to do that, the most efficient way to do that, if you want to get into congestion pricing, is to install a puck in the ground, because then you're getting a little extra data push as to what's actually there. But you can do it.
On your multi-station meters, are they going to be the ones that have the little paper ticket you put on your dash, or are you going to read them wirelessly with a handheld, or what?
We wouldn't suggest a pay and display system for the multi-space. It would be a pay-by-space scenario, so you wouldn't have the paper.
So your enforcers will have a little unit that tells whether the person's paid or not?
Yes, and you can still tell, the machine still will give them a report as to who paid as well. It's just eliminating the paper, eliminating another thing that can go wrong, if you will. It's a thermal printer. Over time, that thermal printer, those things kind of wear out or break down, or they get paper jams, or you have to buy here. If you did a pay and display, you'd have to get special thermal paper, a really heat resilient one, because once they put it on the desk, the paper would turn black. You wouldn't be able to read the pay and display. Plus, it eliminates people handing off the ticket to other people or duplicating it on their computer.
Or the lack of convenience for having to walk back to their car to put
Yes.
it on the dash. So.
Are we going to define the actual number of pay stations versus single stations when you come back with the layout plan, or is it actually being defined in here? Because I get confused when I go through here and see different numbers, so I'm not sure what we're getting.
Well, there's the metered spaces, which is what we call original metered spaces, is exactly what we have now. And we do have defined how many single and multimeter stations we have in the city. Are you referring to once we get the plan from Central for the replacement? We will come back and give you exactly which ones are going to be replaced. We will know that better once we have a chance to work with Central over the coming weeks.
Okay, well, I'm looking on Exhibit B in the report for tonight, and
Very confusing.
yeah, I'm
That-
having a hard time following it.
It's funny, that's a chart I insisted should
Thanks,
be in
Dave.
there because I thought it was clear, but obviously it's not. The intent of that chart was to show you what we have now and what, based on early estimates by Central, they might go to. It's not a requirement, and I lose this bet, so thank you.
Well, I'm completely confused by it, actually. I don't understand what's in the right column there.
Well, I guess what I don't understand is if we don't know exactly what meters we're getting and what kind we're getting, how can we come up with the annual cost to buy the meters and have a fixed cost?
The
Because-
annual cost is based on what we buy. So if it's lower, we pay less. If it's higher, we would pay more.
That's just an
Oh,
estimate.
Oh, that's an estimate.
estimate.
That's an
not a-
estimate, that's all that is, based on their 3 weeks assessment here.
All right, well, while we're on that question and you're thumbing through, what are we paying for there? Have you put a load factor on the actual cost of the equipment of any sort? In other words, if the manufacturer's invoice for that equipment is $42, What's the charge that reads through to us?
We haven't marked it up.
No
So-
markup at all?
No markup.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so how many consolidated pay stations are we getting? We're getting 11, is that what we're getting?
We don't know yet. It's
We
an
don't know
estimate.
yet. Okay.
You'll see it in the plan, though.
Well, see it in the plan.
Early,
and then-
their
and then
estimate.
that's when we'll
yeah.
know what that actual number
Exactly.
is.
Have you seen a price list?
No.
I'm wondering have you seen a price list?
The price list will be, this is on market, just as if we were buying it. Again, it's not proprietary information, it's from the companies.
It's a
that-
third-party manufacturer.
Third-party manufacturer, yeah. So
And I
you'll see that.
presume you have contractual relationships that get you a good price on this stuff. Will we be able to avail ourselves of the price that you can negotiate on that?
Yeah, so I mean, we're taking bids now, because one of the things that we want to do is see what fits best, what pricing fits best. There's no advantage at all for the city or us to pay more.
I would think that the people that live in our residential neighborhoods that have a lot of parking meters in front of their homes would probably like to go to the pay station concept. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would think they would. Have you included that in your analysis? Are you going to include looking at that? And is that what's your experience been on that?
Well, we certainly will. I don't know that, it really depends on the community, so that's a question for the folks that we outreach and speak to. I can't really say
I
from
just
one
thought you
to
might have
another.
had some previous experience in other cities on how people feel about that.
In most residential areas, we would have a residential parking permit program in unison, especially if there was paid parking. So since there is not that, we'd really just have to see what the residents thought of that.
Okay, all right, and I just have one more question. You brought up the issue of blue meters, that we were going to enforce blue meters. So we're going to have two sets of enforcement people out there? One people enforcing the permits and the other enforcing
They will
the meters?
enforce, I misspoke, they will enforce. We will maintain the program. We will sell the permits, we will collect the revenue, but they will do all parking meter enforcement.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Sure, I've got more
Councilmember
questions.
Zansky.
How do we handle, like, new meters? Let's say because we're talking about putting some new meters down in Balboa Village, let's say. So how is that handled within the context of the contract? Assumably, that would increase revenues.
Right.
So how is that just lumped in, or we would
No.
have a contract amendment?
The contract states that the sole authority to add new meters is with this council, but we have agreed to Central that if we do add new meters, obviously that would change a revenue mix, and we would open the contract for amendment to either revenue share or some kind of a profit share in that with Central.
But see, that's a problem that I have with the contract. The contract talks about an opener if parking rates go down or revenue goes
Right.
down.
What
The
if it
city
goes
makes
up?
some decision to reduce revenue. But if the city makes a decision to increase parking rates or add new meters, there should be an equal, it should be either for a revenue increase or decline. The contract needs to speak to both sides of that issue.
Okay. I think it does, but I'll let
Well, I
Michael
didn't
look.
see it. Did you?
No.
I didn't see it. I only saw a discussion of a reduction in revenue.
Like, let's say we increase our meter rates 50 cents an hour. Okay, so hopefully our revenues are going to increase dramatically. If we just leave the same, since we're only guaranteed the first $3 million and then we're splitting over and above a certain amount, at that point now, they're sharing in it, which maybe that's what we want to do or not, but it's because the rate structure has changed, not because they've done anything to add value here, as well as in later years when we would consider increases because inflation or whatever, the percentages are more in your favor. So I would want to understand that.
Well, we'll take a look at that between now and the later part of the meeting, but arguably, too, you could always cancel the contract. And
could, but
if
who wants to do
Central
that?
didn't-
I'd
Well,
rather-
if Central didn't want to participate in realigning the numbers based on new meters or new rates. But it would be better to
Maybe we
anticipate it
could-
in
Maybe we
this.
could think through a solution so we don't have to
do
cancel the
that.
contract.
Yeah.
I don't want to revisit this. I just want to make sure that it works for both of us.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's B1 of the contract that talks about that.
While we're talking about that or looking, I had a question of staff. I don't know if you're prepared with an answer for later or now, but you're projecting a 40% increase in revenues in this scenario that we saw. So I guess I want to understand, I'm assuming that came from somewhere. Is that your experience with other cities? And just to expand on that, maybe you can explain what happens in the short term and then in the long term. So in the first year or two of a contract, will we expect revenues to increase dramatically or maybe decline? I don't know. And then further out, if you could address that.
You want to address that, or you want me to? The way that we looked at it, Bob and I spent a lot of time modeling this out based on our experiences when we've either added technology or put in better enforcement programs. And so that's how we looked at this. You have revenue gains immediately if we did not do anything as far as putting in new technology. You've got revenue gains by just more consistent and fair enforcement. So that's a big percentage of the increases come there. Then with the additional...
Well, when you say enforcement, not from ticket revenue, but you're saying because the threat of getting a ticket is increased, so therefore they're more likely to put
we
money...
don't like to use the word threat,
Well,
but,
or whatever.
there's an expectation.
The expectation of receiving a ticket for not putting money in the meter.
Correct. And so, that there's a significant increase in your collections there. Also, when you add the technology, of course, we find that with the credit card pay, the credit card readers, and that, there's another increase. So we modeled that. Your biggest gains, frankly, are in that first year to 18 months when the program is in place. And I think the future gains come from just more activity in the city, any kind of extra growth that happens here, those kinds of things. But the biggest gains in the contract always are in the first part. And so we're very motivated to get the technology in as quickly as possible, primarily because we're coming into the busy season. That's a very important aspect of our formula as well. And so our biggest risk, we feel, is really in this first year. Beyond that, I think we're pretty confident in it. So timing-wise, we feel pretty good about the timing because of what we're hoping that we have a great summer too, but we feel pretty good about that.
So to follow up on that, I was confused by the whole discussion here of how much the revenue is going to go up. I mean, we're at $3.5 million now. You cited an example of an additional $700,000 of revenue in the first year, so that's 4.2. Where do you see the revenue sort of, what's the terminal value here? What's the level out on the revenue?
Well, we modeled this at 4.9.
4.9, not 4.2.
Is what we believe to be and we call it the medium case.
Okay.
It could be more than that, but on our best estimates, that's what we believe as the medium case study for us.
Okay, so that leads me to my next comment then. For tonight, I would like to see a couple of scenarios here. In this Exhibit C here, you say, well, what's the economic impact? I'm not so much interested in the economic impact as I am a comparison to where we are today and where we would be based upon a set of assumptions. Because in the first place, this schedule leaves out the $500,000 that we're leaving on the table of revenue right now. You don't reflect that anywhere in here because it's really not an incremental analysis.
Yeah.
I'd like to see an incremental analysis. If we do nothing, what is our revenue over the next 3 years? If we make this change and there's this much more revenue generated by the machines, I don't care what the net to us is, this much more revenue by the machines, then the city gets this and you get that.
Yep.
And so, use your base case if you want. The do-nothing case, the base case, and maybe an optimistic case. I'd like to see 3 cuts
Well, actually,
at where the city comes out.
I had already asked this morning, I don't know if you prepared it, but I asked based on $350,000 increments. So a 90% scenario where the revenue actually goes down to like 3.15 all the way up to like 4.55 and see how the money is split up, basically. I mean, like I said, I was hoping we'd see a slide of that, but I don't see a slide.
I responded to your email at 3:45, but I have that information. Sorry.
Well, 3:45,
Well, I'd like
not
to-
available.
Well, I just got it this morning.
Well, can we put that on the screen tonight?
Sure.
What that analysis looks like?
And then, Mayor Hand, if I can address your question about what happens if the city installs new meters, I think that's actually addressed under Exhibit A, Section 2.1E. The idea being if the city does install new meters, Central would have the requirement to do so, and then if that does increase revenue, it's actually already contemplated under the agreement, there would be an increased revenue share coming back to the city because, in theory, that would increase the revenue. And so by addressing the reduction, that would be the instance if we removed meters or somehow reduced it, that it would affect the bottom line.
I know, that's talking about adding and subtracting meters. We also need to understand how this contract works if we add or subtract parking rate. And an increase in parking rate could be viewed, at least from one perspective, as a windfall to you, that you did nothing to earn. But conversely, a parking rate reduction is a negative to you that you did nothing to deserve. So I want to make sure I understand how both meter changes and rate changes are accommodated under this contract in a fair way going both directions.
Absolutely, and I think they would actually be addressed in a similar manner. Whether we increase the number of meters on the street or if we increase the parking rate, either one would hopefully have the effect of increasing parking meter revenue. That would be contemplated under Exhibit B, under the revenue sharing agreement, because at the bottom line, the city would be getting more money into the coffers under the 88.5 and 11.5% revenue sharing formula. So in either event, it should increase the amount of money coming to the city.
We like numbers. We're not
Still
as-
leaves me with a question about,
More of a policy question, though.
right, there's a policy question.
Is that a
about
fair,
what you deserve to get
Yeah.
because we decided to raise parking meter.
Right, and it's not actually only a policy question, because what if revenue is 3.5 million today and it only goes to 3.9 million? We won't see a penny of an increase, if it's due to an increase in rate, because it's all passed through to you folks, correct? So it's not just a,
Well, that's true, although we are also taking the risk for the improvements as well. And so I'm not suggesting that we deserve a windfall in any way. I think the formula itself, the reason that that is heavily weighted to the city's behalf, which it should be, is that let's say it went up $1 million based on a rate increase. Well, to us, that's a little over $100,000. And what additional costs do we have during that period of time of collecting those monies and things? There is more cost to us in it as well. Is that a fair percentage? We could debate that quite a bit, I think. And so we can address that we're happy to address that with staff.
there's more cost associated with a rate increase for collecting extra
Anytime
revenue?
anytime we're collecting more money, there's more cost to us. There's more cost in counting, everything involved with handling that money. So definitely there's more cost to us.
I guess I was thinking of credit cards, but yeah, if there's more quarters, I guess you have to count more quarters.
Yeah.
or something.
Mr. Mayor, I had one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Given your experience with many communities, once you put in these machines that take credit cards and convenience is really present, what's been your experience with rate increases? I mean, most communities that you go into within your 7-year period, how many rate increases do you see?
Well, I don't think it's tied directly to the technology as much as just inflation or things that may be going on in an urban area seem to be driving it much more than just the technology. The technology itself makes it easier to raise a rate, but the technology doesn't really drive a rate. It's more economic conditions that drive that.
Okay.
So we would expect, just to answer your question though, we would expect, or at least I would expect in a 7-year period that you would have a rate increase.
So what is our current rate?
It depends on the zone.
Okay, so how would you you know your business, ballpark, what does our rate look like? I mean, do you think we're really low right now, or
Bob?
where do you think we're at?
That's a dangerous question.
Well, considering the rates were just raised, and you have a lot of meters at $1.50 and $1, I think you're okay now. I'm not saying, yeah, it's kind of a, one of the things is, and I always I've said this a bunch of times to everyone, is normally when you install the new technology, you're also saying, hey, we need to raise the rate. So here, it's really going to be great to add this convenience and not be doing that at the get-go. The rates have just been raised, but it's going to really add that convenience factor. So, but there's no rate increase I would see needed in the near future.
And,
Right.
you know,
Okay, so Santa Monica, for example, I mean, what do they charge to park at the beach for a meter?
It's a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot.
So,
And we're not much.
no. But again, we try to be really careful with that, because when you start drawing comparisons to different areas, that's a really, it's kind of a dangerous discussion to have, because if you live in Newport Beach, you're not living in Santa Monica. Santa Monica, there may be an expectation that the rates are higher. Here, it's much more about what history has, what historically the city has done. And so I can tell you this, that when we did our own modeling to put this contract together, we really thought about the fact that what if it never does increase? What does this contract need to look like? Is it sustainable? Can it be a win for the city of Newport Beach? Does central parking system cover our investment and all of that without a rate increase? So it was really designed around that, because we just, number one, we don't have a control over it. We just don't know the future. So we really modeled it that way.
Okay, I'm going to cut off questions and discussion at this point, because we do have closed session to get to, but then we must also have public comment. So if you folks would have a seat, I'll suggest that we'll accept public comment at this point on this agenda item. Does anyone care to make a comment? Can we turn the lights on, please? On. All of the lights on.
Council, Mayor, you all received a letter from Peer to Peer on our concerns to make sure the agreement doesn't preclude going down, decrease, and thank you, Councilman from our district, or going up. And I think you'll find that we will have a parking study coming out in the next month because of the Balboa bid for the village area, and we will be addressing residential parking. And so, yes, we charge too much to the residents in the city, and there should not be any meters in any residential areas. And so there could be some reductions in that regard going forward.
Thanks, Bruce.
Good evening, Dan Purcell, Corona Del Mar. Thank you for combing over this. I could see in some cities where they just kind of stamp it, somebody knows somebody, and they get the contract through. And thanks for focusing on the personal digital assistant or the phone. And I can see where you would use an application, an app, pay your bill real quick. Please don't let that slip through the cracks in terms of customer service, billing, and all of that stuff. If people are coming here and paying that money, whether or not it comes out of the city's pockets or not, that is money people are spending when they come here to visit. And that adds up over time. If it's not coming to you, it's going off to some other group. Please look at this, the third party, this cell phone service provider, what have you. Those costs could balloon over time. And certainly in 7 years, the technology could change dramatically. So please try to button that down. And then from a customer service perspective, people do get aggravated about towing and parking and all of that business. And if they start getting these charges through their phone, who's going to be this customer service point of that? If they're double charged on their phone or overcharged or whatever, that bill, who's handling that customer service point? Don't feed us to the wolves. There are a lot of people like me. I won't be using a lot of these parking spaces personally, so I won't be paying them on my bicycle. I can't remember the final point. Information is king. Realize when you're out, I know you know this, but when you're outsourcing this, they now have everyone's credit card information, their cell phone information, who they are, where they were parking on your street. That has value. That has some financial value. So, and also maybe privacy issues. I don't know, but thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the public on this agenda item?
My name is Jim Mosher. Like several of you, in looking at this Exhibit B of the building rates, I had some trouble correlating what it says in the contract with the presentation that was made. One thing that's not been mentioned, a number of the payments are contingent on being made per year, and it doesn't seem to be clearly defined what year is being used. At the bottom of this first page, it seems to start on May 1st, and then you go to the next page, in the example, it seems to start on April 1st. So I think it should be clearly defined what the year is, perhaps when the contract starts. And the second thing is these payments for the $804,000 and the payment for the $382 for the equipment. It's very vaguely defined what the city is committing to here, and I see no reason why it couldn't say in a year when the revenue meets a certain threshold, the city will be paying $804, and in a year when the city meets a certain threshold, the city will be paying the $382,000. And from the presentation, I'm not quite sure what those thresholds are. I think it would be much clearer if it was specified here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Do we have any other public comments on this agenda item? All right, seeing none, there will be further opportunity for comment this evening, and not very long from now, actually. And so I would like to take public comments now on non-agenda items. And before we close to adjourn to closed session, I did want to point out that the closed session agenda is set forth in item 2 in the written agenda for this meeting. So do we have any comments at this point on non-agenda items or closed session items? Seeing none, we'll adjourn to closed session.